Well, the Supreme Court decision on Thursday basically made it so that the chemical industry can kill, maim, and injure you and your children with effectively impunity. Sounds crazy, right? Does that sound crazy? But let me tell you how they did it, okay, just to make sure you understand. Bayer, the maker of the pesticide glyphosate. Anybody here know what glyphosate is? Okay, it's the most common pesticide on food in America, all right? They sell about $10 billion worth of this pesticide a year. Here's the problem Bayer was having. They had paid out about $10 billion for just one type of injury from this product, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, from only one type of exposure on the skin, from only one class of individuals that used it, those who applied pesticides. Think about that. They're selling around $10 billion worth of the product a year, but they got to pay out over $10 billion for causing that one type of cancer. And here's the issue. With their billions of dollars, they're able to lobby the executive branch, influence elections, and even got the White House over there to issue an executive order not long ago to declare glyphosate a national security interest. And the EPA for decades has done nothing about it. They've got billions of dollars to influence members of Congress right there. But you know what their money can't buy? Anybody got a guess? What do you get? Who? Their money can't buy juries. So they could get the executive branch to protect them. They could get maybe the legislature to protect them. But at the end of the day, we the people were able to hold them accountable for poisoning and causing cancer to the tune of $10 billion. They had a jury problem. A jury problem. They had a you problem. You. And you and you. We who actually care. They had a problem with us directly. And the Supreme Court on Thursday got rid of their jury problem. How? Here's what the United States Supreme Court, sitting behind that building, which, by the way, their government, that building's government, the White House is government, they're all government. Just the only people not government in this whole equation are the jury and the plaintiffs and their lawyers. That's it. Okay? Here's what they said. Monsanto, Bayer, argued that the EPA government approved the label on that pesticide. And when they did that, they didn't include cancer on the label. And hence, can't sue for cancer because it's not on the label. And they also provided that if it is on the label, you can't sue either because you've been warned. The primary claim that was brought to hold the company accountable for causing cancer was failure to warn. And as of Thursday, the United States Supreme Court of America decided that in all 50 states, you can no longer bring a claim for failure to warn. The primary way that we were holding these chemical companies accountable. You can't bring a failure to warn claim if it's not on the label, because EPA didn't find that's a problem, and you can't bring it if it's on the label, because now you've been warned. For those who said they knew about the decision, did you know that? No. It gets worse. That decision didn't just apply to that one form of pesticide. It's actually a herbicide, well, a form of pesticide. It actually applies to tens of thousands of products that the EPA issues labels for. All herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, rodenticides. As of this Thursday, the chemical companies that make these products intended to kill living things can no longer be held accountable for their failure to warn the public of the harms and dangers of those products. As long as some government official sitting over there at the EPA doesn't find that it's a problem. Forget the juries that found that that product could cause tens of billions of dollars of harm. That should be incredibly concerning to every single American. And I'll tell you why, and then I'm going to move over to a different topic. Just think about it like this. Glyphosate's causing the cancers that I just talked about. But here's the thing. The farmer that uses glyphosate is going to have more yield than the farmer that doesn't. Okay? Which is why the farmer that didn't adopt that wasn't able to beat out the other farmers, so they all adopted it. The next pesticide that's even more toxic than glyphosate, the farmer that adopts that is going to have even better yield. So what's the farmer that's using now the less toxic glyphosate going to have to do if they want to compete? Use the even more toxic product if they want to be competitive in the marketplace. And now you have a race to the bottom to the most toxic chemical pesticide out there because the companies are not going to be able to be held accountable for failure to warn for the harms caused by the very products that are intended to kill living things. That's incredibly troubling. And over the next decades, I think we will look back and long for the days when we have the safer forms of pesticides we have today. Now, we've seen this rodeo before. My primary work that I engage in is not related to pesticides. It's related to vaccines, actually. And I'm using what happened this past Thursday as a segue into what has happened with vaccines over the last 40 years. Because the United States Supreme Court and Congress did the same thing with vaccines 40 years ago. I used to be able to get on the stage, or any stage, and say that the only product in America where effectively the company can kill, injure, and maim you and your children with impunity are vaccines. I now can no longer say that. I now have to add pesticides to that list, and rodenticides, and insecticides, and fungicides. Vaccines are a great way for you to see why what happened on Thursday is such a problem. A few quick disclaimers. I should have started with this. My name is Aaron Siri. I'm an attorney. My law firm has over 100 individuals, Siri and Glimstad. About half of them do vaccine-related work of one form or another. Also the author of a book called Vaccines, Amen. And a lot of the work that you're going to see me discuss today with related to vaccine policy was funded by a nonprofit called the Informed Consent Action Network. In 1986, the vaccine companies faced the same problem that the pesticide companies face today. Just like Bayer was looking down the barrel of economic ruin from all the harm and injury their pesticides were causing. Again, over $10 billion paid for just one type of injury, from one exposure to one class of individuals from their pesticide product. Vaccines leading up to 1986, when there were only 3 routine vaccines, DTP, MMR, and OPV, that's it, were causing so much harm that every company that was making them went out of business or stopped making them, except for one. One company left for each of those 3 products. Now, a lot of companies face this crossroad. Car manufacturers, who here is old enough to remember when car gas tanks used to blow up? Remember those stories? Did Congress say, hey, you know what? Cars are so important. You know what we're going to do? You got to get to the ambulances. You have to get to the hospital. We got to have fire trucks. We're just going to make it so we're going to give car companies immunity to liability so you can't sue them because cars are that so important. That's what we're going to do. Of course not. It's ridiculous. No. Car companies have to face the music in court and make a better, safer product. The same thing with, for example, building materials. Remember when they found asbestos? Who here is familiar with asbestos? Causes cancer. Okay. When they found asbestos in products, did they say, hey, building homes, pretty important. We better give the building industry immunity. You can keep using your asbestos no matter how many people it harms and injures. No, of course not. It'd be ridiculous. That industry had to face the music and do what? Make a better, safer form of building material. Car industry, better, safer form of cars. The pesticide companies should have been forced to make a better, safer pesticide. Well, when vaccines leading up to 1986 faced that crossroads, Congress, at least back then, did something unprecedented. It said, hey, pharma, here's what we're going to do. You don't need to make a better, safer vaccine. We're just going to make it so nobody could ever sue you, basically, for the harms that your vaccine products are causing. We're going to give you immunity in something called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. That was year zero for the immunity for vaccines, and we're going to go through what happened since then. Thursday was year zero for the pesticide industry, and we're going to see what happens in the next few decades there. Vaccines, because of this law, are the only product in America where you can never, ever sue a vaccine company, Pfizer, Moderna, GSK, Sanofi, to say, hey, had you made your product safer, my child would not be injured, wouldn't have a chronic disease, wouldn't be killed. It's the only one like that. You cannot sue for design defect claims. You can still do it for pesticides, but that's not the primary claim they bring. The primary claim that you bring are failure to warn for those. And that was given immunity effectively on Thursday. Well, what's been the result? This is, if you look on your screen, there's screens on both sides. The screen on the right, you will see that is what the CDC vaccine schedule looked like in 1986. A child following the schedule in 86, those are the shots they got on or before their first birthday. That is the CDC schedule today. Those are the vaccines a child gets on or before their first birthday. It's not showing up? Well, in 1986, if you could see the screen, here's what you would see. You would see that a child following the CDC schedule in 1986 would have gotten 3 injections on or before their first birthday. And then you would see an image, a child following the CDC schedule today would get 29 injections on or before their first birthday. 3 to 29. And every single one of those products, and they are products, I assure you, they're not from Moses Sinai. Vaccines are not from God. They're just products sold by companies. I know their worship. Was trialed by a company and put on the market knowing they would not be held liable almost ever for the deaths, injuries, and chronic disease that those products cause. That creates an incredible moral hazard. You're just gonna have to imagine everything I say. Because, when it comes to vaccines, the reason I use slides is that people really need to see the proof themselves to believe it. When it comes to vaccines, people just don't believe what you say, which is understandable because a lot of the claims I'm about to relate to you are incredible. And so, hence the reason I like to use slides. With that said, what else has changed between 1986 and today? So another thing that's changed. Not only have we gone from 3 injections to 29, we have gone from under 10% of kids, according to the data, having a chronic health issue in the United States from the early 1980s to today, according to the data, over 40%. Some data reflect over 50% of kids having chronic health issues. And what are those chronic health issues that have exploded? They're mostly chronic health issues that are related to some form of immune system dysregulation or dysfunction. Think about that. Something has gone wrong. Something has gone terribly wrong with the immune system of the children in our country over the last 40 years. And our public health authorities, they can't tell you really what it is. They don't know. They've spent billions of dollars thrown at it, including the NIH, billions of dollars studying genetics. They can't tell you. Here's part of the problem that they're having, I think. They refuse to seriously study the one thing that they have now gone from 3 injections to 29 injections on or before the first birthday, specifically intended to do what? Modify what? The immune system. Wouldn't you think that's a logical place to start? Who thinks that's a logical place to start? I think it is. Well, there are about a dozen or so studies out there that have compared children with 0 vaccines to kids with 1 or more, exposed to unexposed. And what those studies have found is that children that have received vaccines versus those that have gotten zero, now they're retrospective, they're epidemiological, they can't prove causation, but they're consistent. And they show the kids who are vaccinated have multiple times the rate of the very chronic health conditions that have exploded in the last 40 years. Now, I'm going to tie this back to glyphosate in the following way. What the Supreme Court basically said is, hey, don't worry, folks, about the pesticides. You know why? The government's here, and it's here to help. Anybody know that from the movie? Anyway, the government's here to protect you. The EPA will protect you. The EPA will make sure that these pesticides are safe. So you don't need to worry. You don't need these pesky juries to save you and protect you. You know, that little feature of our entire democracy for 250 years. What could go wrong? Just let the government decide. Let me show you, well, I can't show you. Let me tell you what could go wrong. And I think you will see what could go wrong from the example of the FDA and how it has licensed vaccines over the last 40 years. When you have a preview into that, you'll get a window into what the EPA is likely to do over the next 40 years. So when it comes to drugs, which do not have immunity, if a drug harms you or your child, there too, all right, we're in business. Okay? We're going to make these screens great again. And they did. All right? Good job. Thank you. I think I hear Snoop Dogg. Does anybody hear that? Okay. That's an intro. So in the last, I think this will give us a window to what we can expect from the EPA over the next 40 years. But now with drugs where you can hold the manufacturers accountable, drugs come off the market all the time. And here's the thing about it. Companies want to make money. So before they put a product on the market, they want to know how safe it is because they don't want to end up upside down financially. So most drugs, when they're trialed, often have multi-year placebo-controlled trials that review safety during that period before they go on the market. Why? Who thinks it's because the drug companies are moral? Raise your hand. Ethical? Altruistic? No. Who thinks it's because they don't want to lose money? Okay, because that's how businesses work. And that's fine. That typically works fine in our system of capitalism, actually, because since they don't want to lose money, that drives them to assure safety, as you know, to a degree. It's not perfect, but certainly at least they won't lose more money than they make from the product. And that system's worked pretty good, okay? But they broke that with vaccines in 1986. They broke that financial incentive for companies to make their product safe. So what you see on your screen right now are the 4 highest selling products according to Money Inc. for Pfizer, excluding vaccines. And what you will see is that every one of them was licensed based on a clinical trial that reviewed safety for years against a placebo control. Now on the right side, what you will see are vaccines given to infants in the first 6 months of life, injected into babies in America 3 times each. And those are the clinical trial relied upon to license each of those vaccines. First, you'll see in the second column how long safety was monitored after injection. And then you'll see what the control was. It's patently insufficient to affirm their safety. Why would the companies do that? Because like the pesticides companies now, the chemical companies, they're not liable for harms. And so when they're designing the trials, they're going to do the quickest way to get to licensure that's profitable. That's what they did with vaccines after '86. That is what they're going to be doing with pesticides going forward. You can expect far more harmful products. Did the FDA protect us from that? No, because that is what the FDA relied upon. Now, who doubts those numbers? Anybody here? Come on. Who's brave enough? Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. You doubt it. Anybody else? Come on. If you don't doubt this and never seen it before, you really got to start doubting things more, okay? You better doubt this, because that seems unbelievable. And in fact, had you come to me and said, I want you to come up with the craziest thing possible about vaccines, I'd have had a story about aliens probably before I came up with that thing. Because that seems crazy, right? Right, sir? Crazy. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. And this is why I need my slides. Do you see why I need the slides, sir? Do you see that? Okay. This is the package insert from the FDA website, written by the manufacturer, approved by the FDA, that as required by federal regulation summarizes the clinical trial relied upon to license Recombavax HB. That's one of 2 hepatitis B vaccines given to infants in the first day of life. So let's look at it together. Anybody can do this. If your kids, parents, you can do this at home. You can go to the FDA website. You can go to the licensed vaccine page. There's one page with U.S. licensed vaccines, and you can pull up the licensure documents. Anybody can do this at home. And in section 6.1, you will see a summary of the clinical trial relied upon to license that vaccine. You can also then click through and look at the actual underlying clinical trial reports if you think the FDA is lying to you by looking at the FDA's other documents. Well, let's read it together, okay? Here it is. This is, again, one of only 2 hepatitis B vaccines. Thank you for taking a picture of that, sir. And go to that link on the FDA website when you get home. You ready? Here we go. In 3 clinical studies, 434 doses of Recombavax HB, 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. That is what the FDA relied upon to license this product before it unleashed it to injection into newborn babies in America. And then injection again, and a 3rd time before 6 months of age. I want you to take a good look at that. And if you don't believe that, you got to take that up with the FDA. Who here knew that before today? All right. Your husband didn't, huh? That's why he doubted it. Sir, you got to trust your wife more. It's a good lesson in life. Anyway, okay. I just really let that soak in, okay? By the way, the other Hep B vaccine, Engerix-B, was licensed based on 4 days of safety monitoring after injection. Let's count the ways that this trial is useless to determining safety. Number 1, what are they comparing it against? Was there a placebo control group? No. Was there any control group? No. So, useless. Even if it did have a control group, even if it did, how long did it review safety? 5 days monitored. Useless, even if it had a placebo control group. And even if it had a placebo control group, and even if it monitored safety for years, remember we're talking about babies. How are you going to know developmental issues? How are you going to know immunological issues? How are you going to know the neurological issues if you don't follow those babies for years? You're not. So even if they were followed for years with a placebo control group, it only had 147 kids. What an epidemiologist would say is underpowered. To call this garbage would be an insult to garbage, frankly. This is useless. I don't say that as a pejorative. I say that as a matter of fact. When folks call us, my firm, I got about 20 folks that do vaccine injury claims. We don't sue the manufacturers. You can't. We sue the federal government who's here to protect you in their little, their vaccine injury compensation program. which I'll tell you about a different time. And they say, hey, my baby got a Hep B vaccine. Grand mal seizure within 10 minutes, emergency room. Ended up with all these issues. Where do I want to start to look at whether or not they're causally related? Clinical trial, useless. Then I got to look at the post-licensure safety, and we're not going to have time to go through that. I'm running out of time. Useless too. And you can go to iCanDecide.org and you can read all about there. I've also wrote a book called Vaccines Amen. You can read all about it there. The problem here is that the FDA is not going to save you. It's not going to protect you. The market forces will, and those were neutered in 1986. And that, unfortunately, is what we're going to see probably over the coming decades when it comes to pesticides, unfortunately. I'm going to give you another example, and then I'm going to wrap up, even though I've got a lot more slides. Prevnar pneumococcal vaccine given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. The very first Prevnar pneumococcal vaccine ever licensed was PCV7, okay? Prevnar 7. It was licensed, and I can't make this up, okay? By the way, before I continue, I just want to say one more thing about the Hep B vaccine. When I saw this in the package insert, what you see on your screen, I thought it cannot be. I still didn't believe it. So we FOIA'd, that's the Freedom of Information Act request to the FDA to get the underlying clinical trial reports. And that's what it is, what you see on your screen. I even deposed the principal investigator of this trial, Dr. Stanley Plotkin. We have also petitioned the FDA on this vaccine. There's no place left to look. There is no other data. This is what they relied upon to license this product. Anyway, give you one more example, and then I'll go quick and we'll wrap this up. Another one is the pneumococcal vaccine given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. The very first one licensed ever, Prevnar 7, was licensed based on a clinical trial in which the control group received another investigational vaccine. Does that confuse anybody? If that confuses you, raise your hand. Okay. Prevnar 7 was not yet licensed, meaning experimental vaccine. What would you expect the control group to receive? What would you expect them to compare it against? A placebo, because there was no existing Prevnar vaccine, pneumococcal vaccine. So you would expect them to compare the experimental Prevnar 7 against a group that was got a saline injection, a placebo, or something like that, right? No. This group got, look at your screen, that's the FDA document, an investigational meningococcal group C conjugate vaccine. I can't make this stuff up. Again, if I thought of the most craziest thing to say, I would never have made that up. By the way, the source is right there in the note, okay? It's on the FDA website. You can go and look it up yourself. That is the wrong source, actually. No, second source is right. So here's the crazy part. After they licensed Prevnar 7 on a completely defunct, improper, ridiculous trial, they then went and used, oh, by the way, this is an FDA peer-reviewed a study after it was licensed that said, quote, prior to licensure, the control group in the main study received another experimental vaccine rather than a placebo. And hence, the FDA scientists were like, shoot, we can't determine the safety of this product from its licensure. Okay, they admitted that after the fact. And it also doesn't take anything but common sense to know that. Or just call me up if you're injured from a Prevnar vaccine and ask me to prove your injury from this trial. It's garbage. You can't do anything with it. But they then used Prevnar 7 as the control to license Prevnar 13. Again, this vaccine given to babies at 2, 4, and 6 months. Here's the thing. In that trial, they reviewed safety for 6 months. Still insufficient. It's a baby. But at least it's 6 months. And you know what they found? Quote, serious adverse events reported following vaccination in infants and toddlers occurred in 8.2% among Prevnar 13 recipients and 7.2% among Prevnar recipients. Those are babies, totally healthy. 7 or 8% ended up with a serious adverse event. That is death, hospitalizations, permanent disability, something very serious. You can look up the definition on the FDA website. This should have made what? What should have happened at the FDA? Party hats or alarm bells? Who thinks alarm bells? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would think too. But see, that's not how licensure works. If the control group and the vaccine group have a similar rate, for the purposes of licensure on a regulatory basis, they're deemed safe. But who here thinks that means it's safe in reality? Nobody. No thinking, caring parent would think that's safe. It gets worse. Then Prevnar 13 was used as the control to license Prevnar 15. Sorry, PCV 15. And what did they find in that clinical trial? Check it out. Quote, serious adverse events up to 6 months following vaccination with the 4-dose series were reported to by 9.6% among the Vaxneuvance recipients, that's PCV 15, and by 8.9% of the Prevnar 13 recipients. But what did the FDA say? Why did they say it's safe? Because, quote, there was no notable patterns or numerical imbalance between vaccination groups. Who here is comforted by these clinical trials relied upon to license this product given to babies? Problem is, the market forces would correct for this nonsense, but they won't with vaccines because you can't hold them accountable. And unfortunately, as of Thursday, that's what we're going to see with pesticides. It won't be. There's still an avenue with pesticides because you can still sue them for design defect claims, which you can't do with vaccines. But that is a far narrower way to do it, and it's not the primary way to hold them accountable. In any event, I'm going to skip forward. The same is true for all these vaccines. On this chart on your screen, what you're going to see are the control used to license every single routine injected childhood vaccine from birth to 6 months. Not a single one was licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. My favorite fact check. I get fact checked all the time, by the way, on this. My favorite thing. Problem is, what the fact checkers are doing is they're just calling the pharma-paid vaccinologists to ask them, is it true? And they're like, it's not true. He's not saying the truth. The problem is, like I tell Reuters, and like I tell CNN, and like I tell every other news outlet, stop listening to talking heads and don't even listen to me. Take a minute, be actual reporters, and go look at the actual underlying FDA documents yourself. Look at them. Anyway, if you did, you would find that the following statement is categorically true, that every single licensed routine injected childhood vaccine has never been licensed based on a clinical trial that had a placebo control group. Not only the currently licensed vaccine, but when another vaccine was used as a control, which can be appropriate because that would be the standard of care if that vaccine itself was properly licensed, when the other vaccine was used as a control, that vaccine was never licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. When you trace each of the current vaccines down the chain, and that is what you see on your screen, is that tracing. Any doubts? Just go to the footnotes, look at yourself. Don't even take my word for it. Seriously, if you really doubt it, go look at the sources yourself. Most people will never do that. It's a lot of work. I understand why reporters don't do it. But they should at least desist from making any claims about which claim is true or false until they do. These are all the vaccines that are 7 months and older, and actually I made this when COVID vaccine was taken off of the routine schedule. There is one exception. There is one routine injected childhood vaccine as of today that was licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. Who knows which one that is? COVID vaccine. Yep. In fact, if you're going to take a vaccine based on how robust this clinical trial is, take a COVID vaccine. Compared to childhood vaccines, that vaccine trial was incredibly robust. Compared to drug trials, incredibly anemic. Here are the safety review durations, solicited and unsolicited reactions for all the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life on the CDC schedule. You'll see it's often days or weeks, maybe months. And I'm going to walk you through a vaccine that is not routinely recommended and show you a different outcome with how the pharmaceutical companies trialed it and how the FDA treated it. And that is the dengue vaccine. See, dengue vaccine is not routinely recommended in the United States, and hence it does not have immunity on the 1986 Act. The normal market forces apply to dengue vaccine. And what you will find in that clinical trial, unlike every other routine injected childhood vaccine, is the safety review period was 6 years, essentially for death. It had a placebo control. Wrap it up, you got it. And they had over 30,000 individuals. What did they find? About 2 to 3 years into the trial, they found that children under 6 were dying at a greater rate and had a greater serious adverse reactions than the control group. That's why it's not licensed for children under 6. Had they done the normal clinical trial of every other routine injected childhood vaccine, they would have never found that. It most likely would have been licensed. I'm speculating. It would be considered safe and effective. And if you said otherwise, you'd probably be called some pejorative, anti-science or whatever. Pick a label. Okay? Not only that, for children older than 6 years of age, they found that those who had never had dengue, who had the vaccine and then got dengue, had a greater rate of severe death and harm. So it's not licensed for children older than 6 if they've never had dengue. It's only licensed if your child has had dengue and is older than 6. Why? Because they actually did a proper clinical trial. They would never have known this otherwise. Vioxx, if it was a vaccine, would probably be on the market today, considered safe and effective. If you said otherwise, you'd be considered an anti-vax quack. Anyway. All right, I got to wrap up. But CDC has similar issues, and you should take an opportunity to look at them. I go through them in detail in my book, Vaccines Amen. Also, ICanDecide.org, an incredible nonprofit. You can go to their website, and you can read about all those issues directly. I won't go through all of that. I'll skip forward. There's a whole host of issues regarding mortality, how the claims that the CDC makes on mortality are far exaggerated based on compared to reality. And I will, there's a lot more fun stuff, but I'm going to have to stop there. And yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could share with everybody what's the most recent good news about vaccine accountability.
The most recent good news about vaccine accountability. Well, we have a lawsuit for anybody here injured by a COVID-19 vaccine. Anybody here knows somebody injured by a COVID-19 vaccine? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, anybody here know somebody injured by a COVID-19 vaccine that was seriously injured? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I know not that many people in the crowd. That's 5 out of, what would you guys say, 20 people here? So that's 25%. Okay, how many here know somebody they believe died from a COVID-19 vaccine? 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 5 people. Okay. I note, by the way, some of the same folks who raised hands earlier thinking it was probably questioned whether or not some of the stuff I was presenting was true. Well, for those folks injured by COVID-19 vaccine, as it stands right now, you can't sue the manufacturer because they have something called PrEP Act immunity. We have some good news, potentially, is we have a pending lawsuit in the federal court seeking to strike down the compensation program, and then after that, we would go after the immunity that the COVID vaccine manufacturers have. And so my hope is that we will prevail in that, and then hopefully the folks who've died or been seriously injured by that product can get some accountability. Obviously, that's good for them, but it's also good for us as a country because we don't want companies to be able to engage in the marketplace without true accountability. Not everybody here has the time to research every product. It's not possible. How can you? You can't research every product on the market before you go buy it. You would have no time to do anything else. Fortunately, for most other products, the market forces, imperfectly, will adjust for the harms that that product causes so that when you go in to get a car, you're reasonably assured that problems with the airbags have been addressed with the crushed sensor ball, because otherwise they'll have been held accountable. But there's one main exception, soon to be another, vaccines, where you do have to do your own homework. Any other? Yes. Okay. Last question.
I wonder if you would say something about mRNA vaccines, including COVID mRNA vaccines, boosters, and the new flu shot, which is an mRNA vaccine.
So the question was, if I would say something about mRNA vaccines, and including the new COVID, new flu shot mRNA vaccines.
Are you aware of the first Vanden Bosch's?
Am I aware of the what?
First Vanden Bosch
Yes, Kurt Vanden Bosch. Yes.
mRNA vaccines?
Yeah.
There's a continuing problem with it. They will.
Yeah. I mean, here's my view of COVID-19, the mRNA vaccines. Vaccines are vaccines. Some vaccines stop transmission, some don't. They're all based on very different technology. Hep B vaccines use recombinant DNA technology. There are subunit vaccines, there are toxoid vaccines. These have a different technology as well. What makes a vaccine in my book is the fact that it cannot exist on the market because it causes so much harm and injury on its own merits. It needs immunity from the government to be able to actually exist. So to me, that's the differential. The other thing is that with mRNA vaccines, COVID vaccines, they were rolled out to about 280 million Americans very rapidly. So the injuries that they caused didn't slowly recede into the background rate, as is often the case with lots of other vaccines. You give it to one small cohort of baby every year, and then over time, when the injuries increase, it kind of disappears in background rate, right? Those chronic health issues, 10 to 40%, those very well, if those are caused by vaccines, it's not exact. It doesn't become clear with COVID vaccines because they vaccinated so many people. It was hard to hide the myocarditis. But not that I'm not saying it's a malicious hiding. It just happens over time so that you don't associate it with the product. So to me, that's really the main differential between those products. I think it's just caveat emptor. This is America. You want to get a vaccine? You should be able free to get them. Get as many as you want. But you just have to do more homework with vaccines. Okay.
Very problem with mRNA vaccines that are not well understood by people who feel
Yeah.
would like to give you
Okay.
information that I have.
Okay, thank you. The comment was there's lots of problems with the mRNA vaccine, and I would submit to you that there's a reason that even after 40 years with hepatitis B vaccines, they still need immunity. 40 years later, you still don't know they're safe enough to lift the immunity? There's a problem there. There's a reason they can't lift the immunity. All right, thank you. We're out of time. Thank you so much.